Morning. I'm here with Senator Tom Daschle, former Senator Tom Daschle, in Washington, D.C. at the Joslin Diabetes Innovation Conference. And we're here today to talk about some rather startling statistics that you've been talking about for quite a while, specifically the fact that 1 out of every $8 in healthcare expenses in the United States goes towards the treatment of type 2 diabetes or its complications. That's a staggering number. Can you expand on how you came to the knowledge and what it means for the country?
Well, I don't know there's many people in the country today that in some way are not affected by type 2 diabetes, either because of a family member or in large measure because we all end up paying part of the cost, Chris. And I think that's really what we have to fully appreciate is the magnitude of the problem, not only for health, but for our economy. $245 billion overall, 1 out of every $8 in health, 1 out of every $3 in Medicare itself. And so when I was in public life and now that I've left the Senate, the issue simply gets worse by the year. 41% increase in the last 5 years alone. So the numbers aren't working in our favor right now, which is why this is all the more important, all the more compelling, and why I'm so grateful to people like you and this network for putting the kind of attention and focus on it that it deserves.
How did you come to diabetes? Are you personally involved with it, or what led you to do the research that informed the conclusions you just gave us?
Well, that's a great question. I guess I got involved in healthcare at a very early stage in my career in the Congress. First on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and then on the Senate Finance Committee, and then as the Majority Leader of the United States Senate. It seemed like the issues keep coming back, and as I looked at what are some of the most compelling aspects of healthcare today in this country, you can't ignore diabetes, especially type 2 diabetes, with all of its implications for health, for the economy, and for the budget.
Yes, I think one of your prescriptions was to fix the budget, fix diabetes. So it leads us to, it's an interesting question, and meaning nothing disparaging about cancer or AIDS or any of the other really important health issues that have become high-profile public focuses over the years. Diabetes is a far bigger problem. We talk about the fiscal cliff in Washington. There's a diabetes cliff out there too, based on the 80 million potentially diabetic people who will develop it without treatment. So how do we mobilize support? How do we mobilize recognition? It just seems to never quite get over the top.
Well, that's exactly right. I'm no longer in those rooms that where the budgets are negotiated. But if I were, and I know a lot of my former colleagues still are, I think the message is loud and clear. You want to bring down the costs of healthcare in this country? Then put it where it belongs. Put the dollars, the investment where it belongs, on prevention, on wellness, on a recognition that we can treat a chronic illness far more effectively. It's a manageable disease if we put the attention that it really deserves. So that's really where we save dollars. We can save an enormous amount of money budgetarily, both at the federal level and in our country, if we put the emphasis on prevention, on education, on good treatment, on good, manageable chronic illness care.
It's an interesting point about the value of education, obviously, because without that, no one's going to engage in prevention. And in a way, we're at a very interesting time in the diabetes industry's relatively brief life, in terms of glucometers, at least, and reimbursements. Because the Medicare reimbursement for test strips has just been dramatically cut, as you know, to about $11 for a vial of 50. So most of the profit traditionally associated with test strips and testing has evaporated. Therefore, the industry is almost disincented from educating people as opposed to just selling something. So how can we address that issue? We've got to make people aware, but the financial incentives on the private sector's part to do it, in part at least, have just disappeared.
Well, we're going through a major transformation in our healthcare paradigm in this country. And you're absolutely right, the business models are changing dramatically. Yeah. And as those models change, and as we put greater emphasis on wellness and prevention, we've got to incent wellness and prevention more effectively. But I don't think we can expect the private sector to do it alone, Chris. I think we've really got to understand this has got to be a public-private partnership. We've got to see a federal commitment in resources, in research, as well as in the kind of educational effort that it's going to take to make these business models more profitable and more effective going forward.
And we know, I mean, we have many instances in our history of literally eradicating diseases, smallpox, tuberculosis, polio, that, you know, it's possible. Perhaps it's not easy to cure diabetes, but you can accomplish a lot by investing in research. And unfortunately, we're at a time today when the basic funding for many research efforts is being cut. It's under question. Sequestration's had an impact on it. Is there a way to reverse, or at least to make people understand in the Congress, some of these things need to be protected and exempted?
Well, you know, I think the Congress over the last 3 years has begun to see the effect of what we did when we passed the Affordable Care Act 3.5 years ago, with the Prevention and Public Health Fund, with the National Diabetes Prevention Program. But what we have to do is to say, okay, if you think that's good, what would we do if we could really commit the resources necessary to finish the job, to keep doing it in a more effective way? And so I think that the statistics and the factual evidence is already there in the last 3 years. I think we just need to do a better job of ensuring Congress understands those numbers and can be motivated to do the right thing.
So in the absence of your return to Congress, who's going to carry the torch? Are there identified people now in the public sector who you think can make a significant difference in this?
You know, the nice thing that I find, if there's any silver lining to this whole campaign on type 2 diabetes, it is simply that in this polarized, confrontational environment in which we work today, where it seems like there's almost no agreement on anything related to health or government even, I find a striking consensus among Republicans and Democrats who all understand the importance of prevention, the importance of good chronic illness management, and the importance of this effort to make sure that we have the resources. It gets caught up in larger issues, but when you get to the very heart of it, I'm encouraged by the newer members and by some of the people who are starting to understand and take this as an issue for advocacy that it deserves.
Well, the Daschle certainly is a voice for that kind of advocacy and change, but often, you know, it's easy to get drowned out in the roar of the sort of the tumult that exists right now. You wrote a book back in 2003, I believe, titled "Like No Ordinary Time," and that was about the 107th Congress. You ever think about revisiting that? So certainly the current Congress and the last one provided lots of interesting moments.
Well, that book dealt with the incredible crisis we faced with 9/11 and the anthrax attack in my office, and a whole array of other issues that our country faced, going to war in Afghanistan and Iraq. It really was like no other time, but you're absolutely right, Chris. You could write volume 2 today with all the things that are going on. This is a most transformational time for a lot of reasons. I think we can't afford to be spectators. We have to be engaged. Public policy affects us whether we're 3 miles from Washington or 3,000. We've got to understand that we, as a country, as a democracy, have to be participants, not spectators.
Have you developed estimates, or do you know people that have, of the approximate, the difference in the investment required for widespread public education versus the cost of the consequences of lack of education? Is there a way you can put that into something I could understand or the ordinary person on the street could understand?
Well, I have seen a number of studies that have been done that have convinced me that we could cut healthcare costs by more than a third, Wow. If we put the emphasis on prevention and wellness and the kind of approaches that we've been talking about the last few minutes,
Yep.
we can really dramatically reduce. We're going to be spending $35 trillion on health over the course of the next 10 years. We could bring that number down to something under $20 trillion, which is still an enormous amount of money, but a dramatic savings if we could reach the ideals that we've reflected in talking about prevention, wellness, and good chronic illness management today.
And I think one of the things we have to address along with education is figuring out how to empower a group of people who are not, obviously not endocrinologists, not primary care physicians, or not even diabetes educators. One of the challenges we face is that there are too few people to confront too many problems. So somehow in there we need to figure out a way to mobilize a group of Americans who can be educators without having prescriptive powers. And it would be an interesting thing. That's the sort of thing, that's what the federal government should do.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's such power in collective action. Yeah. One of my favorite stories is, it concerns John Adams in a letter he wrote to his wife Abigail in 1774. He was sitting in the room with what we now know to be our founding fathers, and he said, as he was writing this letter to Abigail, he said, as I look around the room, we're deficient in travel, experience, and education, in almost everything, but there's only us. And I think that really applies today to this campaign and this effort. There's only us. We may be deficient in some things, but the force of collective action, the strength that comes with working together, can really make a difference.
Well, I look forward to learning more from you on this subject and to your efforts to keep it in the public eye, because it's really important that people of your stature make the case and keep reminding us that this is something that's not an option. This has to be dealt with.
You're absolutely right.
Thanks very much for your time.
It's been a real pleasure to be with you.
Thank
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.